All right. So I think we're starting to go live. And so I'm going to push out the tweet announcing to folks on Twitter that I am, in fact, out here in the universe. And then soon we will start talking about the 6 habits that I've cultivated as a GM on the path to becoming more like what I want it to be. In other words, these are things that I've watched myself for if I'm paying attention to them, if I'm getting better at them, if I'm backsliding, or if there's special challenges that are preventing me from exercising what I've learned. There's going to be 6 of them, and I'll jump right into it right now. But let's go ahead and get the ball rolling by just introducing the new studio and some of the layout. So, what does it mean to be on the path to self-improvement? That's what you're looking around here is all about. Big milestones have been passed in my life here in our home. Our son has moved into kindergarten. I mean, he lives here with us, but it's a huge change for the sort of time that I have on my hands and what I'm doing with myself and how I'm going to be moving into a new chapter of my life and hopefully starting a photography business locally and also just continuing to be a dad and an RPG content creator. So I thought it was about time that we made this setup look a little bit more like it was content and maybe make it so that it was relevant to more folks out there in the RPG world. So, what are these habits that I've cultivated over the years? They're things that I find if I remind myself that I need to be doing them, I am more attentive to the situation. I use that session that I just played in, and it kind of becomes part of my career journal, my flight hours that I've developed. When I lose myself in the moment, and these are things which I reflect on later, I also have an opportunity for growth. I say, if I had remembered that skill that I forgot today, that thing that I know I could improve on, or I could try and aim for something closer to what I had in mind, boy, I would be in better shape. So here it is. This is the new hand-splaining studio, and it's where we're going to get down into clinical talk about our GMing and about your GMing. And I'm not going to be one of those person that says that there is one perfect way to GM the game. And as you may know, I am in fact a pretty big critic of a certain other DM guru that says that one of the best ways to GM is to think about how entertaining you are at the time. So I have my own sort of decisions, my own reasons for what I like, and you may know me, and we'll get to know each other over the course of this stream and more streams to come. I'm going to talk about how these skills are the things that I keep a watch on myself for, how they are where I really contemplate if I'm getting better and try and police myself. So, number 1. This one actually gets to live in the book. It gets to be part of the GM tome of best practices. And it is roll once and let it ride. Now you may know this from the burning wheel. You may, who am I? And let me just move the camera so that the book's not in the way. Because we can do that, because this one is my phone. How about that? Wirelessly, which is maybe why it kind of looks a little bit like a dubbed movie, because there's a little bit of latency going on there, but you know what? It looks pretty good, doesn't it? So you may know Roll Once and Let It Ride from Luke Crane's Burning Wheel. And now Luke Crane is in the RPG doghouse. He misbehaved and invited someone who had been exiled onto a Kickstarter and didn't tell other people that that person who was in exile was going to be part of the Kickstarter and blah, blah, blah. And that's not really what this video is about, is it? I'm glad it isn't, because this is much more exciting. This is the idea that anytime you are invoking a die roll for a player's actions or an NPC's actions, the idea is to cleave to one die roll for that particular intent and action and let that determine whether the outcome is a success, a failure, whether it has mixed outcome, and that die roll can inform that, and then you can get on with things. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't roll to hit and roll for damage. It means that if a player says, I want to sneak up, I want to sneak up to the bandit camp, and you tell him, okay, roll for stealth, probably. And then the die is cast. He throws his d20 or whatever the particular RPG that you're playing is, and he's able to generate a result, which is able to say, all right, it looks like I think I was successful here. And so then you can say, what's going on at the bandit camp? And you can start describing the conversations that he overhears. You can move forward from that moment. Possibly, depending on the system, you might roll for the watchfulness and vigilance of the bandit sentries as an opposed check. But the point is that there's a single resolution as opposed to roll 20. Roll for each 20 feet that you creep towards the bandit camp. One of the reasons for that is because the cumulative probability that it's going to be a failure is increasingly higher. You set people up to fail in one sense if you do it this way. You set people up on a path to not being able to estimate how likely their failure is, because how many rerolls is it going to take to actually get to where they wanted to be, to what they intended to do. Let me just get that so that our vignette is a little bit better. It's a new studio. You got to watch out for these things. You got to work on them. And this is a path to self-improvement too, isn't it? The other side of it is that if an NPC or a player character fails or doesn't achieve the intent that they meant to, how many more times, how many gotchas or gimmies or roots hanging on the way down the fall of the cliff are they able to reach out for? Because at a certain point, if you give them more and more chances to roll, they're going to succeed. So the more distant that you become from roll once and let it ride, the more that you are getting into a world where it's more like you never should have said that it was a roll to begin with, because it's impossible. And the player character being a part of that world probably is able to estimate that, at least some, before they went into it, before they got in too deep. Or maybe you could narrate it as, well, you start sneaking towards the bandit camp and you realize that it's just so thick with sentries that you're never going to be able to make it up to the bandit general's tent to overhear the conversation that you want to. See? And with that information, he says, okay, I'm gonna get away from there. Or maybe he says, all right, I'm gonna punch one of the guards and I'm gonna get into a disguise. I'm gonna try and find a lone guy, maybe going off to the bathroom, or just looking for herbs, that sort of thing. And I'm gonna just give him a little blackjack over the back of his skull, and then I'll have a means to get inside. So you get on with the story, first of all, and you get on with what happens next much more readily, rather than granularizing each 20 feet on the ultimately unsuccessful way towards that bandit general's tent. And so that sounds pretty good to you. I mean, it may or may not, depending on the kind of style of game that you want to cultivate. But the question lingers. The question remains, are you rolling once and that's determining the outcome of an action? Or how many more times are you invoking a roll as the game master, saying, you got to roll for that some more. You got to roll for that some more. Maybe it's a sea voyage over hundreds of miles. Is there really a nuance in between the individual 20 miles a day that leads to that? Or can you generate from a single seafaring check that on the third day an event occurs? Maybe a sea monster, the sailing, the lookouts, the alertness of the crew falters and they're not able to tack in time to get away from a pack of vicious narwhals that come impaling into the hull, and they're carnivorous vampire narwhals or something of that nature. The point is to say that the more times that you roll, the more like it was like you never rolled at all, or like it should have never been a roll to begin with. That it was either a yes or a no, the more times that you go towards that. And it's just a matter of statistics. So that's kind of the first thing that I use to check on myself. And it's also relevant to the system. How much am I fighting the particular rule book? Or how much am I in sync with the rule book? And I'm saying, okay, roll. And then I see what happened, and I'm able to kind of jive with the fiction, and everybody's at the table is jiving with it, and you can kind of diagnose whether you're really rolling with this particular RPG system by how many times the table is making itself roll to get like a particular thing done. And this is about as much as I can dance with my shoulder, and I don't think it's that exciting. But you know what is the next skill in the book here. Cultivating battle map agility. And by that I mean, the question is, and I know this is going to drive somebody crazy if I have that L stolen from the first part, so we'll just clean this up. I think that'll probably make someone more comfortable out there in the universe. It might have been me, although usually I can let things like that go, but I like role-playing because I can be a lot of different people. Anyway, suffice it to say, when I mean cultivating battle map agility, I mean that sometimes when it's not a combat, I want to tell everybody that I'm rolling out the map, because the discrete positioning of this situation is relevant. And I know, I'm sorry about the glare. And one day I'll figure out how to fix that particular situation. I think it's probably by not using a wide-angle webcam. But unless y'all think it's time for me to start a Kickstarter for a better camera, I think this studio setup will suffice. Just like this particular raggedy battle map, let me see if I can get that sharp. Yeah, you can see the little hairs coming off of it, has sufficed for 15 years of gaming for me. So the thing is, though, when I pull that out and the players see it, a lot of folks instantly think, oh, it's time for combat. And they even will pick up their initiative die and they'll say, I got a 12 for initiative. And you say, relax. This is just a marketplace scene. There's lots going on. There's lots of bubbling activity. And maybe the question is whether you miss that there's a Cardassian away team which is just beaming up as your guys have beamed down. Maybe it's that there are pickpockets infiltrating the place, and one of them is about to pilfer the tricorder of a young ensign. And of course, things will start to awaken in the story from there. So the question is, where is the young ensign, and maybe where is the veteran security officer who's responsible for preventing these sorts of prime directive violations from happening? See, these are questions which maybe an actual discrete granular map, a tactical map, can answer. Even though Star Trek's not really a combat genre, nobody's going to pull out their gun and disintegrate somebody in a Star Trek genre situation, or that would feel really off genre. That would feel, if I were to pull out the battle map and you would think, oh, it's a combat? I thought we were kind of just beaming down to investigate some reports that the Cardassians were tampering with the indigenous culture here. And, suddenly it twists. Now, this isn't to say that sudden twists are out of place, but the thing that I think is really important to think about when you're doing this is how much is your group kind of developing a unified sort of zeitgeist, a body language, an understanding of why we're using a particular tool or why we're not using it. Sometimes it's a matter of just being really careful with the description. It's being flexible. Also, to not use the battle map, even if it is combat. So there are dozens of situations like chases, dark caves, labyrinths, like a labyrinthine city streets, where it is not within the character's ability to really tightly control whether they're next to a door or a window. And, if somebody reaches through it or if they can dive through it. And those sorts of questions it's just such a complex environment. And beat by beat, you're really just trying to stay on your feet and you're trying to keep your weapon ready to parry between you and your opponent. And, so it seems like that might be a situation where even though it's combat, you may not pull out the battle map. And getting to a place with your group, cultivating that agility, sometimes just by, you know, early on in the campaign, having some moments where it is a combat and you don't use the map and miniatures, if that's your custom. Or if your group is more theater of the mind, pull out that map and, it'll be up in the air whether it's a combat or not. Um, and likewise, if this is a very tactically minded, combat focused table that you've walked your way into or that you live at because you've been playing a lot of Pathfinder or 3.5 or whatever the case may be, maybe Shadowrun. Sometimes in Shadowrun, and you know this too, if you played any of that heist genre, you're probably familiar with how uh, half the time you're just kind of trying to watch the mark. You're trying to see what's going on in the facility. When is the guards changed? And we're just going to try and slip in between the cycles of the security system. When the ventilation system needs to flush the special gases that it uses for the laser detectors once every 72 hours. Let's just, I'm just throwing stuff out there. And this is a very tight situation where the discrete positioning is both dramatic and interesting, and where it makes sense to maybe pull out a tactical tool, a tool with a lot of granular stuff to cultivate that battle map agility. Uh, and that's a matter of just the group growing to trust that you're making the call as the GM. And really, it is kind of ultimately your call. It would be very awkward, and I can't think of a good way. I mean, let me know if you can think of a good way to make it up to other folks at the table. But in my mind, it seems to me like the GM's got to make that call of whether we're going to use the map or not. Or maybe the table will decide we always use the map or we always don't. But if it's going to be flexible, you got to develop an ability to read the room and read the situation and make a call about whether in the non-combat scenario it needs a map. Whether it's a combat scenario where the map is just not going to work, and giving more tells, giving more description and ambiance to communicate to the players that that's going to be the case today ahead of time, so that they can kind of get their mind in character and understand why they're not going to be able to move their little character around on the 5-foot squares as so many people became so comfortable with, and almost they got really anxious if they couldn't. I've seen this, and this is not casting any aspersions or shame on folks for having those sorts of tastes, but tastes can change, and often there are reasons for tastes to change. Okay? So that was number 2. And let's move on. Let's talk about the next one, which is, I think, maybe really important to moving from my early days in D&D to other RPGs, but I think it's still pretty important to D&D classes and level style games, because it really will determine a lot about the pacing of your table. I see there's a lot of glare from the ring light above our tabletop here. So I'll just start telling you about grow out of last man standing while I move these tiles to the side. And I just tell you that sometimes combat does not need to go on until everybody's dead on one side. Sometimes there's going to be a writing on the wall, a victory condition achieved. And this can mean that a particular skill check might determine whether anybody got away. It might be a matter of, let's say, if your group got away. If you were able to use the fog cloud spell or the smoke stick that you broke or some other type of concealment grenade to break off combat. Maybe it's a matter of you were shot at briefly as you came into line of sight, and a couple of here soldiers on your parachute mission behind enemy lines. They took a couple of pot shots with their MP-44 as they saw some allied paratroopers cleaning up their parachutes. But then you slipped into the underbrush. You were able to get to ground, and it was a long climb down for those Germans. And using your effective, training and your ability to know how to break off from a skirmish, that stops being a combat situation, just as a matter of course. And this is a really big part of growth for Star Wars, where so much of combat is running away. So much of combat is, oh my goodness, it's a Star Destroyer. Oh my goodness, it's Darth Vader, and we're just a bunch of, non-force using scrubs. So much of Star Wars is about the getaway, or it's about how there was just a nasty creature that reared its ugly head in the wilderness on the planet that you happen to be on, and you got to fight that creature off, or tame it, or make it no longer relevant to the predicament you're in, or maybe use it and leverage it as a mount, as so often happens in your good old prequel meme territory. Suffice it to say, combat can be over before everybody's dead. And cultivating the skill to know how to see that's where things are going is a place for GM self-improvement. And it's a big one for me. That's number 3 on the road to GM growth. These are the things that I've cultivated, and maybe you, in trying to achieve something closer to your desired style, you might like these too. Okay, so the next one, I ran out of letter L's, and I think that's kind of funny, but I'm going to start spelling it for you anyway. And that's, a lot of people will talk about the 5 senses in description when you're describing an environment. I will tell you right now that that's good advice, but my question is instead about elements. Now, we could talk 4 elements: earth, air, fire, wind, and water, and that's probably what more people are familiar with. We could talk about the Harnick elements, which are spirit, light, sterile light, like the sun, radiation, you could call it. So spirit, light, death, the cold of death, life, the growth of vines and oozing things, and the mystery of how biology works in a inorganic universe. Fire, literally combustion, reactivity, the way that matter is energetic. Zmorvi, which is the way that matter is hard and fixed and things are enduring across the millennia, the millions and the billions of years. Those are the elements in harm. And boy, I just need one L to make this word work. And one T. So just like, what does it smell like and what does it sound like? Is there light for you to be able to see? Those are things that people will talk about when you're preparing your descriptions in your environments. That is advice that you will get as a game master when people are trying to help you cultivate questions about, what does this adventure look like? What does this dungeon look like? I'll tell you that as far as when you're world building, when you're actually trying to think up those descriptions, the logic will carry downstream more readily for me. If I say, okay, there's light because there's a window. Because there's a window, there's a view. Because this is an old abandoned house and this is a Twilight 2000 game and we're talking about a post-apocalyptic environment, the window is broken and as it so happens, there are some wolverines. There's a family of wolverines which are raising their kits in this particular bedroom, which, happens to also have a manila folder with the locations of all of the emergency bunkers for, let's say, the Ukrainian SSR. And so this is a potential place for a lot of supply caches. Now, this could be sort of a really kind of boring, quiet adventure. But as I start to build up these descriptions, as I start to discover more and more about what this environment looks like, maybe it's like a dacha, a cabin in the woods, and start to think of how this becomes more like an actual errand that is heroic, depending on the genre of your game, that might be relevant. What are the elements that are present out there in the world that you're building? What is enduring? If you say that this castle has stood for 3 centuries, that means that there's been a lord in this castle who has been lording over peasants and developing an economy or squandering that economy with warfare and the like. And that's been the tale that is told. That's kind of it provides a lot of knowledge. It tells us more about the nature. It tells us that we're much more likely to see livestock than we are to see wild bears in the forests of that particular part of Caldor on Harn. I hope that you're getting a little bit of what I'm putting out here when it comes to considering elements in environments. Now, the 5 senses are great for description, but when you're establishing facts, I think that elements do a great deal to go downstream into other parts of the environment that you're creating. So if you say that a town is built of stone, then you're also able to understand that it isn't going to burn down. And it doesn't feel arbitrary later when you say that everybody's had an arsonist player character at their table at some point in their GM career, I bet. And when you say, no, this one's not really going to burn with too much readiness. I'm sorry, this town is different. They're not up for that. When you're able to respond like that, or with the converse of now it's the time to go wild and you guys can make a clean getaway. There's hay bales have been turned into straw roofs all across this village. Those answers to those questions are not pulled from the void. They're not unobtainium. So that's just what I would say about developing my description is, was I thinking of elementary building blocks when it came to the environment that I was describing to the players? So the next one, we're getting pretty far down the list of these skills, aren't we? We're on skill number 5. I should probably look at chat. What do you guys think? Do you think it's time for me to look at chat? I'll be excited to find out if anybody's hanging out here in the middle of the afternoon. But the point of this is to practice this new setup, see what kind of bugs we might have with the audio or the visual, and get a better handle on whether this is something, this format, where I can be a little bit more relaxed. I can hopefully not do so much editing behind the camera, and I can tell you about my experiences and maybe share some actual like practical clinical advice. That's one of the funny things is that, a long time ago when I first learned about that channel called WebDM, I was really excited. I thought, wow, Jim is the kind of guy that I'd like to pick his brain and have a conversation with. Now, it turns out it kind of remained at that beginner level of like, if you're just starting out, and that's the sort of videos that they kept making, which is fine for their style. But mine is a little different, and the kind of things that I'd like to talk about here on the channel are also a little different. Skill number 5 is about scoping dice beyond the moment. Now this has bearing on roll once and let it ride. It has bearing on the idea of last man standing and growing out of it. This is part of my philosophy too, is to ask the question of like, okay, how much time can this particular die roll represent? So, I want to find out how people feel about vampires here in this village. And you say, okay, roll, gather information. Diplomacy, I think, is how they describe it. And so the player rolls the die. Maybe we get a die with more nuance, like a Star Wars die that generates some stuff. And we can talk about the conversations that the player had. We can talk about the knowledge that they gained. And, if this is not really like a central thing, if this is a way that the players are developing their readiness in this situation rather than the actual sort of moment of highest adventure, well, then we can let that situation be described and let it sort of come off through a single die roll. And that's more empowering to the players, and it can let time pass. An example of this place where it's been traditional is in the random encounter roll. Every 6 hours, roll for a random encounter. And maybe you can force a reroll if you have a ranger in the party. That might be a kind of a modern way of acknowledging player competence, player character competence. So where can we go from there? What can we develop with this scope dice beyond the moment as an idea? Well, if a captain on a Star Trek ship says, I want to build esprit de corps, and we're going to have some differing competitions for target practice among the teams, the various shifts, and we're going to do some combat response drills. How quickly can the ship get secured, beat to quarters, and at full red alert, and everyone's ready to go for an emergency situation? Maybe we'll have some damage control drills, and we'll depressurize some sections. Maybe we'll blow out some EPS conduits on purpose, and we'll look at how that goes. And I'm going to stress test the crew, and hopefully we're going to get to a place where, knowing that we are headed into Orion territory, we're into a place with heavy pirate activity, the crew is going to be confident, and the merchant ships that we are expected to protect are going to feel that aura of surety that we've cultivated. So the captain's wanting to create an advantage, and the questions about whether that comes off successfully that can have a scope of multiple days. And so if it was a test, we might look at whether that was an extended task using Star Trek Adventures mechanics, or maybe there's a specific moment where like the most reluctant, reticent crew member, the real linchpin of whether the crew is going to be ready for this fight, and there's sort of a tense interaction with that person where their belligerence or their cowardice or whatever checkered past they have is what's put on the table that becomes central to the moment. And so we resolve it with like that scene. And if that scene goes off and that person's problems are put to a resolution, or that the people become confident, then the crew is now ready. The advantage is generated. So you can think about lots of different ways that you can scope dice beyond the moment. This could be a matter of the entire party making one survival roll by the person who's best at it to ford a river and carry their packs across. And so you might be able to decide whether anybody got wet, If anybody lost their footing and, went downstream, got very soggy, and had to be saved, um, you don't have to invoke the situation where you set up the combat map and somebody's running down the stream, throwing their rope out and whoa, you gotta save them from the rapids. That question might escalate to that level if the survival check's especially low, but you might be able to roll once and let it ride. And one of those questions is around scoping dice beyond the moment. I like to have sessions where there's a lot of push and pull, and I get surprised about what happened. I'm impressed with where the players and the characters took things. And those sessions arise for me when we are able to move along at a clip, and also where I'm able to use the system, I'm able to roll dice and make the system a generator of some of that world and those events. And so those are places where I cultivate that, with the tactical system, with pulling out the map and using it for situations that can be granular, where detail is important. And I can do that sometimes, or maybe sometimes you can't pull out the map, but it's okay because it's just not a situation where that really has a lot of bearing, even though we're going to be raising our fists. This is a question which, it's going to do a lot to change how much happens in your sessions, how much you get done, how much the players feel like happened. And sometimes one of the big things that's a buzzkill that I've seen more campaigns fizzle from than anything else, and this is sort of my reason why you should listen to me, I guess, if that's, if you care, or if that's super important to you, uh, is that the more that you're able to do something in the first session, the more that, whoever's waiting for a particular milestone to be hit, who's hanging on that particular next event, they feel like they're getting closer to that next event. I see one of the reasons that I see campaigns fizzle is usually the first adventure happens, they go to the starting dungeon or whatever, and then they need to walk to the city, and the walk to the city just snowballs into this kind of endless journey of minor encounters and meeting some NPCs and so on. And that's okay if it's going to be a kind of a road movie sort of game or a campaign that's about travel explicitly. But if that's not the understanding, if you didn't have session zero and you kind of communicated until everybody understands that, people are going to be waiting. People are going to be looking forward to getting to the city and seeing what it's like to be an adventurer, getting to the next dungeon if you're having a dungeon crawl campaign. The feeling that there's inertia, that there's momentum to a particular campaign is the thing that brings people back session after session. You can be incredibly entertaining and super fun and make the goofiest voices with the weirdos that they meet on the road or the
little goblins that are constantly attacking them as they're trying to make it to the big city.
But it becomes trite, frankly. The more years that you spend in the hobby and you think, oh God, this is going to be another campaign with a failure to launch, isn't it? And you look down at your character sheet and it's like, I'm level 6. What have I done? I fought a bunch of goblins on the road. Ugh. I don't know. And these things happen. And I've found that cultivating these skills that I talked to y'all about today are really the way that I've mastered myself, where I've tried to get better. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect yet. And that's one of the ways that I ask myself these questions, is with these things. Now, skill number 6 I didn't talk to you about yet. Here's what it is. Listening for intent. Now, what I mean by that is there are going to be moments where the player is saying, I'm trying to do this thing. I'm trying to climb the wall. And you say, oh, you didn't get out your rope, or boy, you should have used your pitons that you had in your backpack. the character is a practiced mountain climber. The character knows how to climb a cliff. They know when to get out those spikes. And maybe there's a question about whether, when they reach for their pack and they get those spikes out, maybe it's going to make too much noise. Maybe they're going to think about how they might disturb a shock lizard or, a shock worm that are known to lurk in cave-side cliffs in this region. And that's going to occur to them because they are woods-wise. But they intend to climb the cliff. So the question is, kind of around, okay, well, you use the appropriate tools, meaning the ones that you already have. You're able to find a strategy to climb the cliff without those tools or not. For example, you lost your backpack. You had to drop it when you were running from the orcs a while ago. So maybe the difficulty class is higher. Or, maybe it isn't, but you have to find a place where you can just kind of booty scooty down on the gravel to the bottom of the cliff, for example. The intention is I want to get to the bottom of the cliff. The player character is saying that, or they want to get to the top of the cliff. And that comes through the lens of a player saying it to you, but then a character who's in the world, who's able to see so many more things around in their environment than has ever come out of your mouth as the game master. You can't possibly describe every color of everything. There's no way you're ever going to describe every subroutine of diagnostic or every engineering crew member who's monitoring a particular subsystem of the warp engines. I guess you probably could enumerate all them, but there'd be some consequences to doing so if you did. But Jordy is got his comm badge there, and he knows that he can call Ensign Giusti if the subspace transceiver is having a bit of an issue, for example. Or he can get down there himself and expect that there is a team that is already there who's going to be able to assist him. If there's a big wrench that needs to get pulled, or somebody needs to watch a little graph wobbling on a screen while he concentrates very hard. He's able to utilize the resources and the abilities of being the chief engineer. A fighter is able to intimidate unarmed people. They know how to do it. A fighter, a veteran is, they're going to know how to, a military veteran, they're probably going to have some practice with, dealing with, civilians in an occupied territory, or, responding to snoopy people who are trying to steal their supplies. They're going to know how to do this without, literally having to, poke the person. It's like, I want to stop this guy from stealing our rations. And, this is a situation that the character has practiced for or has been in at some point in their past. Now, the question that I've put myself to, or that I used to think, is like, well, maybe the player wants to role play. Maybe the player is thinking, I really want to role play, being a good mech pilot. And so I thought to myself, I'm giving them the opportunity to make the decisions that a mech pilot would make, or the wrong choices. I'm challenging them in some respects. That's what I've learned, is to think like a mech pilot. Now, that's different than role playing a mech pilot who has had those experiences and is informed about what it means for a PPC to discharge, and what that means for the heat condition of their mech, and for the damage to the opposing mech. Like if the player says, I want to shoot him, and you say, okay, well, do you want to use the SRMs or the PPC? And the mech pilot probably has some experience with that. It's like the PPC is probably, in this situation, the PPC is the go-to weapon. You could just respond with that when he says that, and the player nods. The player says, "Yeah, all right, let's zap him." And having some ability to be informed by the character's core competence, the character's ability to achieve an intent has been another kind of key skill that I've started to cultivate. And this is the most recent one. It's the one that I have the longest way to go with. It's the one where I'm working on it and I'm improving, and I've hopefully at least. But it's definitely the place where I was running an adventure with a lot of temporal mechanics, a lot of cause and effect. Somebody was trying to infiltrate the past to change the past in a Star Trek story. And Ivan Mike 1968, he was playing this Andorian chief engineer character. And there was a deranged Vulcan, on one of those quixotic like Vulcan quests that sometimes they get resolved to go on. And he was trying to interrogate him. And there was some sort of information about how Star Trek works, like subspace stuff or chronoton fields or something like that. And I didn't look at it from the character's lens. And I was kind of leaving it up to the player to hear the Star Trek words and process them into one of the normal things that they do, like maybe we can discharge all the particles out of the deflector dish because there's too many of them. I don't remember the exact circumstance, but I do remember that I wasn't forthcoming, and I let that interrogation kind of go on and the dialogue to kind of go back and forth. And so Ivan was looking at the situation as in like, I'm going to get the information I need to act from this dialogue situation. I was thinking, I've already given the information in this exchange, in this NPC exchange. And so the NPC is sort of gloating, and he's trying to be cryptic, and maybe he's trying to express his superiority by continuing to give different subtle hints. But on the other end of it, there's a person who has managed to get promoted to the chief engineer of a starship in the very meritocratic Starfleet of the United Federation of Planets. He's good at this. He's good enough to understand, the obvious clue. No, there's more to it than that. There's more to listening for intent than that. And there's other sides to each of these. But my question for you is, are you developing as a game master? Do you think of yourself as on a road of self-improvement? I bet you do. And that's what a lot of these more generic talks that aren't about a particular system are going to be about here on the channel moving forward. I want to start talking about some clinical stuff. The road to GM self-improvement. What are the skills? What are some techniques that I've used? What are some kind of little clever MacGuffins, seeds that I have sown? And, I'm talking about this from the perspective of I've been there. I'm on a journey. I'm not by any means super experienced. I'm not a professional GM. I'm not a salty old grognard, but I've been there and I've done a few things, and I think I'm getting better. I need to check if I really am. I need to pay attention, and I need to keep evolving because the culture of play and the hobby, it continues to change. So you see how it's a lot of stuff to keep track of. And it's also fun to really use each session as an opportunity to grow. So these are the things that I've been using to do that. Let's look at some chat. See if anybody's hanging out. No, not really, but that's okay. Yeah. Oh, no, we got some stuff. Hey. I should probably change the title. Oh, no. Oh, the title. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, it does have a thumbnail, which is accurate, but thank you for that, Eric. And that's probably why we don't have so many people talking with us today, is because I neglected that. Lots of things to pay attention to here as we're moving into the future with the channel. I hope you have a great afternoon, and for everybody who's tuning in later, go ahead and leave a comment with some questions about some skills that you are looking to master, some places where you know that your GMing style needs some troubleshooting, but you're you're trying to figure out which of the skills it is that, really maybe is a place where you have room to improve and what you might be doing good already. And, you don't want to mess that up necessarily. These are questions, these are conversations that we can have, even as our tastes and, what we want out of the game can be different. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope this autumn is turning into a good one for your role playing gaming. Take care, folks.